Okay, so let's begin the material. So today we have an assignment for week 7. Okay, so we're starting week 7 today. We have spring break next week, so there's no class next week. So the assignment is due a week from Sunday. So it's due at the Sunday at the end of spring break. I sincerely hope that you do it this week, and that you don't do it over spring break, and that you enjoy your time off from school, or use it for something, some other kind of learning other than doing your homework on Saturday night at the end of spring break. All right. So anyway, so what we have is we had talked about starting JavaScript this week, but I've decided to wait and do that after we come back from spring break, simply because I didn't want to start introducing some new material and then be gone for a week and then maybe just have to restart that when we got back. So we're just going to start JavaScript the week that we come back. I do encourage you to read the in your book the chapters on JavaScript. I think it's 7 through 10 is where we're going to start. If you have done some programming experience, Java, C#, anything like that, you'll find JavaScript very comfortable. If you're new to this, then there'll be a bit of a learning curve. We're going to move very rapidly through JavaScript. So we're going to talk about functions and if statements and while loops in JavaScript in general, and then we're going to get into how you engage with the HTML document itself using JavaScript. And so we're going to move through that material pretty rapidly. When we get back, we'll have really only 9 weeks of the semester left, and the last 2 weeks of that will be used for the final project. So we'll really just have about 7 weeks of material left to do, and so it's very doable to cover JavaScript in that amount of time, but we will be moving at a pretty fast pace. All right, so let's review the assignment that's due for this week. We're going to move away from building a single web page, and we're going to build a bit of a site. Okay, so what I want is a personal profile site. Okay, the site should consist of at least 4 different pages, and they should be linked together through a common navigation header. Okay, I want at least these 4: a landing page, a resume page with about me, a portfolio page with some pictures of work that you've done, and a contact page. Okay, so here is information about each of the pages, the kind of the minimum requirements, and I'll show you my example here in a minute as to what I did, and you can go from there. There's also a link here for this example page, which looks like this. And so this is the page that I've created. This is my landing page. You see it's just very simple. It's got a background image. It's got a little menu bar up here, logo on the top with a little navigation. This is my About Me page and my resume page. It's got a couple of paragraphs on it. This, by the way, this line right here is a border on the bottom of this H2 tag. It's not a horizontal rule, although horizontal rule works just fine. Okay, and then this is my portfolio page, which is really just a grid of some images. These are just stock images. This one is actually mine. None of these other are actually mine. I did not actually make Stripe.com, although I wish I had. So what these are intended to be are portfolio images of HTML documents or work that you've done. You could take a snapshot of some of your homework assignments if you wanted to include them in here, or you can just get stock photos or anything like that off the internet. Okay, I did a little logo here. I used Canva.com to create a logo. You can that's a great free tool to use if you want to do some picture manipulation. And then I have my contact page here, and on my contact page, I'll show you in my example. I've got a hover element here, so that when I hover over these, I'm changing the CSS, and I've got a little text shadow and things on there that go. And then here my links here link between each of the pages. So the menu bar, this navigation bar, is consistent on all 4 pages. Looks the same, and it's got a link. And you have links from each page to the other 3 pages. Okay, so this is 4 HTML files and 1 CSS file, and then whatever images you use. Okay, I want all of that uploaded. So if you have images that you're using locally, you need to make sure that you upload those images. Okay, if you're using images that are linked to with absolute resources somewhere else on the internet, then those should work just fine. When I grade this, I'm going to grade it on my MacBook. And I'm going to download this I download all your submissions and I run them locally using Visual Studio on my MacBook. Okay, so make sure that it's going to work on your machine. If you're using JS Fiddle to do this work, and then copying it into an HTML file, just make sure that it works before you submit it. Okay. All right. So here are the requirements. So landing page, a common navigation header, a background image that covers the entire page, your name and a tagline. On the resume page, the common navigation header needs to have a background color that's different from all the other pages. I want at least 3 sections, and at least 2 of those sections must have at least 3 entries. So here on my page, this is a section. My experience is a section, education is a section, and reference is a section. I want multiple entries in each of these because I want to see you style up these rows, this paragraph structure with the header and the paragraph. Okay. You don't have to follow my example exactly. You can apply your own style if you want to have a different format. That's fine, but it needs to be aesthetically pleasing. Okay, and if whatever colors you pick, you doesn't have to be an artist palette here, but let's stay away from bright neons and things that are going to be ugly. So here are so then on the portfolio page. Oh yeah, there needs to be a link on the resume page to download your PDF. So here on this, I have a link here, and this will actually link to a PDF document that will start to download. Okay, which is very simple. Your href will just be the PDF document. Okay, the PDF doesn't have to be your actual resume. You can just use a placeholder PDF or whatever you want. But I want you to be able to download a PDF there. The portfolio page. Common navigation header, different colored background. I want at least 3 rows of images, and I want 2 images on each row. Okay, if you have an odd number of images, then the last one can just have single. Okay, but I want a grid there. Okay, you can get stock images. There's a great website called Pixabay that you can get stock images, or you can just create your own. I will give you a tip here to, as you capture those images, make sure they're the same size. Try to get images that are all the same size. Okay. Or if you can't get them the same size, then make them the same size by using Canva or some other, excuse me, sorry about that, by using Canva or some other tool or Photoshop or something to make them the same size. Okay, but it will be a lot easier for you when you're trying to build that grid if your pictures are all the same size. Even if you want to display them smaller than their natural state on your page. Starting with images that are consistently sized will be a lot easier. Okay, even if they're not the same size, if they have the same ratio width to height. So if they are a 1-to-1, if they're all square, or if they're a 1.7 to 1 width to height ratio or something like that, then you can then they'll scale nicely to a standard size. Okay, your contact page must common navigation header and background. I want at least 5 contacts displayed in a single row. All of those should be links. They don't have to link to anywhere, but they should be actual links. Okay, and I want each link to use the hover attribute so that it looks different when you hover over it. Okay, the common navigation header has to have a background that's different from each page, and so in my example, we notice that the header is always has a white background on every page. Okay. And it stands out from the rest of the body. It is not sticky, so as you scroll up on the page, the header disappears. Okay, if you want to try to make a sticky header, that would be a great experience. It's really easy to do, and if you just Google sticky header, then you'll get all the CSS you need. Okay, and by sticky I mean that it's going to, as you scroll up, the header is going to stay, and then all the rest of the content will just roll under the header as it goes up. Okay. And that takes a surprisingly small amount of CSS to do. Okay, let's see what else. I want you to make a logo. You can either find a generic logo on Google Images, or you can build your own using Canva.com. Those are usually like a 2-to-1 width to height, so 300 by 300 wide by 150. So it's kind of a long horizontal image, and then you can that will usually expand and scale nicely into a navigation row. Okay, 300 wide by 150 is what I think is what I said. That's what I meant to say. Okay, and then the header bar the navigation bar should also have links that are active that actually link me between the pages. Okay, So those would be those are going to be relative links to an HTML file that's in the same folder as the others. Okay, you must apply some kind of CSS to every element on the page. So every element needs to have some kind of style other than the default browser rendering. Okay, you must style every element in some way. Okay, here's some tips. Use this validation service, W3 Validate service. You come here and you can either put in a URL or you can upload a file, or you can just paste your HTML in here. Paste it in here and run the check on it, and you'll get errors if you're missing attributes or you've got invalid attributes, or you have tags that aren't closed properly. You're missing a balance tag, or you've got a spelling mistake in a tag. I run the homework assignments through this, and I get a lot of errors here. Okay, some of them are misspelled words. Some of them are just improper use of attributes. You can also check CSS. So if you once you run something through here on the next screen, you can actually paste CSS in and get a validation of your CSS, and it will return back if you've used an invalid tag, an invalid attribute, or an invalid value for one of those attributes. Okay, so use that. Look at your final solution in different screen sizes. So make it really wide. Display it at 1500 pixels, which is about the standard laptop size. Display it at 4000. Display it down at 900. Make sure it looks proper in multiple screen sizes. Okay, I'm going to look at it at 1400 pixels, 1440 pixels on a MacBook. That's what I'm going to look at it at. Okay, but you should make sure that it's displaying appropriately at multiple screen sizes. Okay, I want a single CSS file. Okay, so we have 4 HTML files, but I want a single CSS file that holds the style for the entire site. Okay, so I don't want you to be duplicating the style. So that nav bar has the same style across all 4 pages. And it appears one time in my CSS file. So I don't want you to be duplicating CSS across multiple CSS files. Okay. Pick images that are the same size. Pick a color scheme. If you go to colorhex.com, they have a palette page that will give you some related colors. Sometimes that's helpful to get you started. If you don't know what colors to choose, you can pick those, or just you can navigate through ColorHex and just look at the blues, or if you want a blue tone, then you can find some blues and some shades and tints of that will look good. So colorhex.com is a great tool. You should use that. I'm going to download all these to my laptop and use Visuals. It says Visual Studio. That's actually VS Code, not Visual Studio. And I'll be using the file protocol. So make sure everything is going to load in that. So that means that if you have images that you're using, the links need to be relative. I've seen some absolute references, references on those images. You cannot put // my documents / something in your HTML file. It's not going to work when I load it on my laptop. Okay, those need to be relative links, relative based on where the HTML file is to the image or the CSS file is to the image. Okay, so relative links only. Okay, and then upload everything, either individual files, or you can zip it all up and upload a single zip file. Okay, all right. Any questions? No, I can show you mine. So here's my live version. Okay, and we can see that this is my landing page, and it's got a background image. I've got my logo up here. I can click on the About Me, and it navigates over to this page. You can see I'm changing here to the different HTML, but I'm running in the file protocol. Okay. If I click the download, I get I just have this generic placeholder resume. Okay. Here are my links as I scroll up. Notice my header is not sticky, so it just rolls up as I go. Here's my portfolio page. Okay, each image has a little caption underneath it. They're all the same size. The images here, my images are not all the same size, but I've made sure that all of my rows have a consistent size. So in this case, I've put this one, I've used a vertical align middle here to make sure that my image looks nice relative next to this one the one that's next to it that's a little bigger. Okay, here's my contact page. My contact page, I've put this little shadow. This is a text shadow that I've put on that. That's why you get this kind of this white kind of ghosting effect around that. So that's the text shadow. And then when I hover over it, I'm just inverting the text shadow and putting a background on the link, okay? Using the hover attribute on the A tags, okay? You don't have to link. You don't have to use your own real information here if you don't want to. But I want these links to appear to work. Okay, and then also my logo always links back to the home page if I click on that. Okay, it looks something like this in Visual Studio Code. So this is my project folder. It's called example. It's got a CSS folder and an images folder, and then I have my HTML just right in the root of that folder. Okay, so all of my images in HTML, my relative paths are going to be in those subfolders of the of the project. Okay, I have 4 HTML files. I've got a couple of images, and I've got a CSS file. You can see this is my home page HTML. I'm not going to show the other ones because this is being recorded. And then this is my CSS, which I've also clipped off so you can't see the whole thing. And it's not that long. It's only 154 lines. And that includes a bunch of spaces, okay, a bunch of blank lines in between the selectors, okay. My HTML is not that long. I think the longest one is the about page, and I think it's maybe twice the size of this one, maybe 60 or 70 lines. So not that much, okay. I don't remember exactly how long it is, but it's not very much, okay. So if I don't think it's very much, 60 lines is not that much. Plus, once you get the nav bar done here. This nav bar is identical in every page, so that I just cut and pasted that into each HTML page. If you're actually deploying a site, you would be using that as a snippet and including it, not duplicating that across HTML files. But for the work that we're doing, I got it right on one page, and then I just cut and pasted it into the other pages. Okay, but it uses standard class names and CSS across each of the pages, which you can see here in my example. So a little tip here for each of the background images, I put a class name on the body tag so that I could identify which page I'm on. Okay, so here I can say whoops, see what happens when you click on that? So you got a little extra tip there. So see here on the body page, I use this body.home. So then that is going to apply to any page that has the body class, that has the class of home on the body. And you can see in other places I've done others where I've used that same body tag. That's in there somewhere. So, okay, all right, so that is your assignment. Any questions about that? I'm just going to close all these. Okay. All right. So if there are no questions, then we'll just use the rest of the class period just doing just doing a couple of challenges just to kind of practice on a few things. Is there anything in particular that anybody wants to see? The maybe the alignment of something from one of the homework assignments. Maybe my solution for the kiosk boxes. Anything there?
Probably just the boxes.
The boxes. Okay. Okay. I'll do the boxes really quick. So I'm going to do that here in Visual Studio. So I'm going to just make week 6. Oops, put it in the wrong folder. So I'm going to make week 6, and I'm just going to add I'm going to add a new file here, and I'm just going to call it kiosk.html. And I'm going to add a second file called kiosk.css. Okay. Here in my HTML file, I'll start by just doing my my doc type. I get my HTML link. I get my head link, my head section, and I put my body section. Okay. So I just get those done right out of the gate. I'll come in here. I'll put a title in. The title says kiosk example. Okay, and then I always just copy a link from something else for my CSS file because shamefully I can never remember how to type it. So So there we go. So now I have it. I have my title put in. I've got my HTML kind of set, and I've got my CSS linked. Okay. Turn the light off so we can see that. Is that better? Okay. So if we go back and look at the assignment, let me get the image of what it's supposed to look like. Let's download this so we can see it. Okay, so it looks like this. So it's got a background image. Okay, that is the background, and then it's got these individual buttons. The buttons have a gradient, a little bit of a gradient from a lighter color to a darker color at the top. They've got a white border around them, and they've got a little, and they're rounded on the edges, so it's got a border radius on there, and then it's got all capital white text in the middle of each button that's centered in the button. So even here where the text is shorter, it's centered here, and all the other buttons are taking up 2 lines. Okay, so so this to me looks like I'm gonna because there's no scroll here, I'm gonna put the background image on the body. Okay, so it's gonna go straight on the body as opposed to making a first level container inside the body. I'm just gonna put the background image right on the body. Okay, and then here I'm gonna make a container for all 3 rows. Okay, that's gonna be my content container, and then I'm gonna make it one container for each row. And then I'm going to make a container for each button inside the row. Okay, and so this button will actually be a div element. Okay, we could do it with a button, or we could do it with a div. Maybe we'll do a little of both and just kind of see how that works. Okay, but here I'm going to make this. So I'll have a row container here, and then inside each of that row container, I'll have 3 containers for a button, and those containers will all have the same class of button or something like that. And then for each of those, I will use a single CSS selector to style all 9 buttons. Okay, so I'm not going to have a separate style for each button. I'm going to use the same CSS selector for all 9 buttons. I'm going to use the same CSS for all 3 rows. Okay, so I'm not going to have a lot of CSS here. Okay, so let's get started. First thing we'll do is we'll put the background on the background on the body. Okay, I need a background image to do that. Okay, so let me see if I can get one. Did anybody find one that we could use somewhere? So if we look at Alamo College's edu. Let's see if they have something here that we can get. It's loading a little slowly here. It's that super fast internet here at San Antonio College. Let's see. I go to the visit page. What do I get? Here's one. We could try to get that background there, right? I don't know how big that is. Let's see if we can get that one. So if we inspect that, we just go to whoops, that's not what I wanted to do. I want to do the inspect. So I'm just going to inspect that, and then we're just going to dig through the code here to see if we can find where that image is. Okay. Looks like it might be on this main background. See, and here's the background image right here. Okay, and this is a relative link here, so I can just paste that in, and it should come up right there. Let's see, does that get up? Yep. Okay, there it is. Okay, so we can just use this image. Now be cautious when you are getting images off websites like this. Many of these images are copyrighted. Okay, and so you can, in our case, we're using an image that likely belongs to SAC, and they have not given us image permission to use this publicly. We're using it as an educational piece. Okay, and we're not going to publish this. But be careful when you're picking images off the internet. Even the little icon images, some of those are licensed and require you to pay for them. So if you're picking images, make sure you pick one that is free to use. So I'm going to go ahead and take this and save it. And let's see. So we'll just save that in desktop in class week 6. We'll save that. Okay. Go back. Oh, where'd it go? I saved it in the wrong place. Okay. All right, so so now I have my image. It's called Skyline BW, black and white. So I come here to my CSS, and I'm just going to say body. My selector is just going to be straight up body. I don't need a class or an ID there. I'm going to say background. Background image. I'm going to tell it URL, and my link is just going to be skyline-bw.jpg. Okay, and this is my relative URL, Skyline. There's Skyline-bw. There's no, I don't have any directory navigation instructions here because it's in the same file. It's in the same directory as my CSS document. Okay. So because this is CSS, it needs to be relative to the location of the CSS file, not relative to the location of the HTML file where it's going to display. Okay, so it always has to be relative to the file that it's in. Okay, so now we can let's load this up and see what it looks like. Okay, and there we go. There's the body. Now I'm getting this this replication. The image is repeating here because the image is not the same size as the body. The image is smaller. So I'm going to come back and I'm going to add another image here for background size, and I'm just going to do cover. Okay. Nope, that's not. It was background. Background position cover. Okay. It's still not there. But so. This is close enough for what we're trying to do. But essentially, we're getting this repeat because the image is too small. Okay? So use a bigger image when you're trying to do a background off the whole page. Okay? So then what we can do is we'll just keep going. So now in my HTML, I'm going to put in my body, I'm going to put a main content container. So I'm just going to have div here, and I'm going to call it class equals content. Okay? That's going to be the content that goes around all three rows. That's the container for all 3 rows. I'm going to have a div here. I'm going to give it a class equal row. Okay, and inside that I'm going to have a div for we'll call this class equals we'll call it button. Okay. Let's not call it button. Let's call it box because if we have time, we'll actually try one with. We'll try to make some of these with an actual button. Okay, and if we look at the content of this one is event credit. Okay, so I can put a label in here. We'll call it event credit. Okay, I'll just cut and paste those 3, and then we're going to have how to apply in ACES are the other links. Okay. So now if I go back to my page and refresh that, we should see we have the content here, but it hasn't been styled yet. Okay. So now I'm just going to start applying the style. I'm not going to try to do all 9 buttons at once. I'm just going to get 3 of them working, and then I'm just going to put the other 3 in, or the other 6 in. Okay. So the first thing I want to do is let's just work on getting the red button. Okay. The red button, the white text, and the white border. And then we'll work on getting them aligned horizontally across the page. Okay? So we come back to CSS. First thing I'll do here is I will say for for my class of box, okay, I want a background color, a background image, I want a linear gradient, and I want it to be to bottom, and I want it to start at, anybody know what colors those are? Where that's going? I can use my digital color meter to figure that out. You just use red and maroon. Let's just do that for the sake of time. Okay, we'll just start at red and we'll go to maroon, and we'll just use some of those built-in values. Okay, now I'm also going to want it to be I'm going to want it to be a little bigger. Okay, because it's kind of small. So let's just start by giving it some padding. Okay, and let's just put 50 pixels around. I don't know what that's going to be yet, but I'm just going to make it. I'm just going to pad it up a little bit so it's going to be bigger. Okay, and then let's put a border on it. Let's do 2 pixels, solid white, and let's do border radius of 20 pixels, 25 pixels, and let's see what that looks like. Okay, so now I refresh it. Okay, and my boxes are bigger. There's a gradient on there. Okay, and I've got the white border. Okay, they're way too wide. Okay, so I'm going to want them to be more narrow, right? Okay. And then my text here is also needs to get some help. So I'm going to come here with my text, and I'm going to say in my box, from in each box, I want all the labels, and I want to give them a font weight of bold, and I want to give them a color of white, which I can use white. I want to give them a font size, and here I don't, because I want these boxes to be about the same size regardless of how big the screen is. I'm going to use an actual pixel height here instead of an EM range, because I want them to be fixed size. Because if the text here gets bigger, it's going to make the box itself bigger and ruin my alignment. So if the user has a larger than normal default font size on their screen, then that text would get bigger if I used a relative measure. Okay, so here, and that would be fine if it was in a paragraph or in some free flowing text that was going. But here, because I want the text to stay inside that container, I'm going to give it a fixed size, and I'm just going to start at 24 pixels, and we will work through that and see what we actually need it to be. Okay. Okay, so here we have my four boxes. I think that should be a little bigger, right? So let's go ahead and make it 36 pixels. Okay, that looks about right. It needs to be all uppercase, right? So I think that's this one, text transform, and I can use capitalize. Okay, nope. Text transform. Is it uppercase? Yeah, uppercase. There we go. Okay. All right. So that looks pretty good. So now let's put them side by side. Okay. So how do we do that? We can just come in here. So each of my, let's go ahead and do a split screen here so I can see my code. Okay. So we can see over here in my HTML that I've got each box is inside this row container right here. So what I can do is up here I can say for each row, actually what I can say is for each box, I just want to do display inline block. Okay. Now they're going to be side by side. Okay, but they're all different sizes because of the contents. Okay. So how big do I want them to be? I don't know. Let's experiment. So I'm going to open up my dev tools here. Okay, can everybody see that? So here on the box, so I'm just going to start with this one. And I'm just going to say, let's give it a width of, let's just start at 100 pixels. Okay, that's too small, so I'm just going to kind of experiment here with kind of how big they want to be. That's 185 pixels. Maybe we go a little bigger. maybe 200 pixels there is what we want. That looks pretty good, right? And then here I'm going to go ahead and add another one for, let's see, for padding. I want some margin. I want to spread them out a little bit. Margin, and so here I'm going to put a margin, and let's just go all around. Let's start with a margin of 20 pixels. Okay, that's probably looking pretty good, right? Okay. So we'll save that. I'm going to go back and check my Visual Studio Code. Notice that because I have DevTools open, in this case, the changes that I'm making in DevTools is going right back here into my Visual Studio. Okay. You have to be careful. If you start editing both sides, then if you start editing in DevTools and editing here in Visual Studio, then that link gets broken sometimes. And so as you're editing, you want to make sure that you are capturing any changes that you're making. Okay. So that's pretty good. Okay, we need to get that height to be there so we can experiment with that. We can try to say height. We set it at 100%. That does nothing. So we can say the height. Let's see how tall is this box. So if we look at this one box, we can see that it's 304 by 185. So if we just say let's give it a height of 300 pixels. Oh, that's terrible. Okay, let's just narrow that down. Are the boxes square in the example, or are they rectangular?
They're rounded rectangles.
Rounded rectangles. So that looks like 85 pixels. That looks pretty good, right? So you've got this one is kind of offset there, so we can also just do here a vertical align. Let's try it at the top, and then that'll force everybody to the top. Okay. Whoops. I want to save that. All right. So now I also want my text inside each button. I want it to be centered horizontally as well as vertically. Okay. So for that, I can say here for centering, I can just say aligned. I can say text align on the box, center. Okay. And that'll get me there. And then I can say on the labels, I wonder how we can center that label. If we look at the label, so if we look at this one in particular, we can see that the label is all the way at the top inside the box. If we just put a vertical line on that label, I'll see if that does what I want. I'm not sure that's going to. Vertical align middle. Nope, that's not got it. So we can do, this is where you were struggling, huh, Jonathan?
Which one?
With the getting the vertical alignment right here? Or was the other Jonathan?
I
was struggling with this part too.
Yeah.
When I submitted it, and I'm sure you hear this a lot, it worked well on mine.
Yeah.
But it worked. It did work fine. It looked fine.
Yeah.
I tried it on both my laptop and my desktop, and it looked fine. And then I guess
Did I make a comment that it didn't line up properly? Or?
Yeah, and then
Okay.
I went back and checked it, and lo and behold, it didn't line up on either of my devices. So I'm gonna see if I can go back and fix that.
All right. All right. So we're gonna come back to that, to the vertical alignment. So so here on so now I've got my individual buttons are looking pretty good. I want to center them in the screen. Okay. So in that case, what I want is what I want to do there is I want to take my row, okay, and I want to in this case what I want to center is the contents of the row, okay, because I don't want to center individually this button. I want to center all of the buttons at the same time in the row, okay, relative to each other. So I want this block of buttons to be centered, okay. So I'm going to go to the container, to the row container, okay, and I'm going to do a let's go back to CSS here, okay. Oops, see, it didn't pick up our height change there. What was the height that we had? 85 pixels, I think is what we had. Okay. Let me make sure I got all those changes before we move on. So out of height, text align, vertical align top. Okay. Notice there somehow I was making changes on either side of the Visual Studio, and somehow I broke my link between the editor. So text align center on the box, and vertical align. In this case, I'm just going to do top. Oh, did I have top or did I use middle? I use top, text align center, height of 85. Okay. All right, so that should get it. So let's refresh this, make sure we didn't lose anything. Okay. So now I want to center all three boxes on the screen. Okay. So now what I can do is on my row. So I'm going to come up here. I'm going to do row, and I'm going to do text align center. Okay. Okay. Now my row is centered. Okay. But now let's look at what it looks like in different screen widths. Okay. So to do that, I'm going to click on this little button here. So right down here on the top of DevTools. What that's going to do is it's going to give me the it's going to automatically format my screen size to different default settings. So I can pick any of these: iPad, iPad Pro, some of these default phone sizes. I can rotate so this is a horizontal iPad versus here it's a vertical iPad. Okay, so I'm just going to come in here. I'm going to use the responsive. Okay, and what this does is it allows me to change my background here. So we can see now that my screen now is 2,200 pixels wide by 673 tall. Or I can bring it in. I can say, what does it show if it's 672, for example? Okay. So what I want to do, okay, this is looking pretty good, even though it's wide. Okay. So that should be fine. I'm going to look at it at. I usually go for desktop views. I usually go down to about 1100. I try to make that's kind of the small end of the laptop, so I tend to look at all of my screen designs at 1100 pixels, and then 1440 pixels, and then at 2000 or 3000 pixels for those really big screens, and make sure that I'm aligning that it looks good in each of those sizes. To do design for screens smaller than 1100, if you're getting down into tablets or mobile devices, that requires some media queries that we're going to be doing. So that we'll touch on later in the session. Okay, but this is looking pretty good at 1100. I'm not crazy about my background. I think my big problem there is I just have a bad image. My image needs to be square or more square in order to look good there. Okay, but now if I come in and say I've already got one row done, so I can just cut and paste this row. I got two more, and now I'm done. So now all I have to do is change the text inside each button. Okay, so we notice that by doing that one row at a time, I don't want these rows and these individual boxes. I don't want the boxes to be different from each other. I want them all to use the same CSS, the same selectors, and I want the rows to be different from each other. I want each row to use the same CSS. So I get one row working, I get one box working, one row working, and then I just replicate those, and I'm good. Okay, so this still looks good up here. Gets kind of funky when we get down into really small screen sizes here. Okay. All right. So that's that. So that's about it. So then really the last piece is just trying to get that that horizontal. I could fix these. What are the other services directory, college map? I'm going to fix this. Student orientations, course schedule. Okay. This one is academic calendar and text store. Okay. So now we're looking pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and go back to just my standard screen here. Okay. So that's looking pretty good. I've got a little bit of an issue here for my orientation. Maybe that is because my button is a little too small. Okay. So see what I was saying? In this case, you always want to make sure that you style the button for the largest piece of text. That one appears to be the largest that I have there. So to fix that, I could either make the button a little bigger, or I could reduce my font size. Either one of those. So we can experiment. So if we look at the box and we say the width at 200 pixels, to make that centered, see, I'd have to get all the way out here to make it centered, right? So I don't want to do that. 200 pixels. Let's leave that at 200. Okay, and let's just make the font smaller. So the font size we had was in the label, right? Font size label, and let's just kind of we'll make that a little smaller so it'll right there at about 31 pixels. That'll fit in. Okay. I could have maybe looked for a different font there on that. If you look at our example here, what it looks like is on the example that they've just decreased the padding on the button. So you see how this is a lot closer to the edge than what I have here. So if I put that font size back to 36, and then I went back to my box class and let's say if we tried to decrease that padding a little bit. Oops. Yeah, so it's that padding on the right there that's really too big. So if I did 50 pixels all around, but then if I just tried to do the right here, and if I just had the right go down, I'm going to have to change that I can't change that here in my code. So here, my CSS, I can come in and say, let's see, so if we did 50 on the top and the bottom, but let's do 20 on the sides, let's see what that looks like. That looks terrible. So I'm just going to leave it at 50 and make the font size smaller. See all that, and I just went back to the first thing I did. Okay? I'm going to do that. Okay? So what would happen if we said, let's come in our HTML. Let me switch sides here on how I have this. Okay? Let's come in our HTML and let's add another row. Okay? But instead of doing containers or div containers here, let's try a button and see what happens. So if I use a button element, and then in my button I'm going to give it course schedule. Okay. So when I refresh that, we see I now have this button down here. Okay. Let's move this to the top just so it'll be easier to see as we're fooling around. Okay. So I have this button. If I give that button a class of box, then it's going to inherit all of the same attributes. Okay. And so we see that that button is starting to look like, it could be a replacement for this box. It's not going to be one-to-one. There I might have to actually use a slightly different approach to my styles. But you see I can get the same value off of button. One of the benefits of using a button versus a div is that in a button, when I get into working on behavior and actually wanting to link this to something, if I use this as a button, then it's by default clickable anywhere within the boundaries of the button. Okay, so if I click anywhere, so if I click down here in this very corner, that's still going to register as a click on the button. Okay, versus here in the div, I'm going to have to use JavaScript to attach a special listening event that says anywhere you click on the div. Whereas because this is a button, I just get that clickability automatically. Okay, I'm still going to use JavaScript probably in this case to navigate off the page. but it would make it using a button kind of gives me some extra click capacity there. Okay. If I were to use, let's try to use one of these with instead of a button, let's put in. Let's give it a link and see what it does. And I'm just going to link here. When you link to the hashtag, this is just a link to yourself. Okay. So now when I link that, oh, that screwed up everything, doesn't it? So now I get this course schedule. So now this whole thing is a link, and you see I get my default cursor over that. Okay. So we could have explored using these just as links. Okay, or divs or buttons. Any one of those would have worked. Okay. You'd have to work through your consistency here and make sure that you get. What happened there is I didn't close my link tag. Okay, so we could explore styling these and let's just fool around a little bit and see if we can get those going. So here, if I say class, let's call it class button. Okay. Actually, we'll just use row button as we don't even need a class on that. Here on this class, okay, so let's start with our default styling here that we had. I'm just going to cut and paste that, and I'm just going to say here for any row button, okay, that's going to be my default styling, okay. So now when I come in here, this is my button, okay? Now I can come in and I can add and get my font weight. So I can copy those values. They're no longer on the label, they're now on the button itself, okay? And we see that it's getting bigger, so the problem is there that my button is too small. So let me get a oops, refresh that. Uh-oh. My page froze. That's not good. Let's see what's happening there. Yeah, so if I inspect this, my laptop got really slow all of a sudden. Okay, so now I can come in and I can start playing around with the styling here. You know, make it wider. You know, my width is going to need to be up there. My height. Okay. Okay. And in this case, the reason that you know, my padding is not applying, you know, as much. The reason it's smaller is because the div tag has a bunch of padding inside of it. The button is addressing the padding differently. Okay, so you can see it. The point being is that with a little effort here, I could have just as easily styled this as a button or as a link, as I did that div container. So really, what I'm after there is just a container of some kind. Okay, doesn't have to be a div. I could have used some other container, including a link, which is a container element because it's got an opening and a closing tag. Okay. Okay. So there's that. I'm just going to delete this, and we're just going to stick with what we had. Okay. So that is my solution. Okay. And then we'd fool around with this vertical alignment there. I'd have to explore that a little bit. I'm not exactly sure why that's not lining up. A button would solve that problem for you because the default centering on a button is going to put it in the middle of the button. Okay. All right. So I think we'll end there today. Any questions about that? Hopefully that was helpful. A lot of you that have submitted the assignment, you did very well on this particular one. So hopefully what you did was very similar to what I did. Some of you maybe picked up a few extra tips, I hope. Okay, any questions? All right, so that'll be it for today. Your assignment is due a week from Sunday, so you have an extra week to work on it, but please don't wait. Start soon. It's 4 pages, so depending on how long this last assignment took you, it might take you twice as long. Okay.